Good afternoon, all. Good to see you. Now, this presentation is following a presentation by Victor Morris on the personhood of a child in the womb, the humanity of a child in the womb. And my part in this is to speak about the Virginia Constitution and a certain amendment that is progressing its way through we speak. I'm Barbara, and the way I got associated with Truth Builders is that I've been friends and co-laborers with Victor and Sue Morris for many years, and I have a desire for the body of Christ to be more knowledgeable and more literate about constitutional law generally, as we advocate in the culture for biblical principles. And it is possible to look at constitutions and law from a biblical perspective, which is one thing that I've had the privilege of doing as a law teacher at two Christian law schools, Regent University and Liberty University. I've entitled this The Virginia Constitution and Amendments, and I'm going to start with some definitions. Just fundamentally, what is a constitution? And you may think, well, a constitution is that document that starts out, "We the people," that I memorized a bit, and that's the federal constitution. Here's my definition, and I don't know, is everything showing now for the whole slide? A document that sets forth the structure of the government, or we could say a government, and states the powers and responsibilities of the government. And I would distinguish a code. When you will hear me talk about the Constitution of Virginia, and you'll hear me mention the Code of Virginia. A code is a compilation of the laws passed by the legislature of an entity, whether it's a federal government or a state government. And the code, of course, is subservient to the Constitution. The Constitution is the ruling document. In a democratic republic, such as the United States and its states, a constitution has to be approved by the people being governed. Now, many nations have had constitutions that weren't always approved by the people being governed. The former USSR had a constitution of sorts, containing a Bill of Rights, for example, but all the powers were delegated to the Communist Party. So in the United States, we have a federal constitution and 50 state constitutions, just as we have a federal legislature and 50 state legislatures and a federal court system and state court systems. So the states can govern themselves as long as their governments don't override the provisions of the U.S. Constitution and laws. So we're going to talk about an amendment, and constitutions generally provide for amendments. So why would a constitution be amended? A constitution attempts to be a document that lasts and works into the future, but at any given time, the people in a democratic republic may agree upon a change in some aspect of the structure of their government that's going to be inconsistent with the existing constitution. And here are some examples, and you're familiar with these. In the United States, our original constitution did not allow for a graduated income tax. It took a federal constitutional amendment to do that. Our original constitution had certain people who were allowed to vote, and that was changed over the years, as you know. And here's just one more recent example. The voting age was lowered to 18 by the 26th Amendment to our federal constitution. Here are some examples in Virginia. At one time, there was a prohibition on lotteries. It took a constitutional amendment to remove that. And of course, after that, we got pari-mutuel betting, first betting on horse races, then other betting, and then a state lottery. Another example, which if you voted in Virginia in 2020, you saw on your ballot, was an establishment of a nonpartisan redistricting commission. Remember this?
Yeah.
Very good. Redistricting historically had been, and threatens to be again in the future, a matter of what the party in power wants to do when it's time to redraw lines of voting districts based on population changes, based on a census. And this was a good amendment to establish a nonpartisan redistricting commission. And somewhere in this presentation, I may have mentioned there are some other amendments working their way through our legislature. I'm going to be talking mostly about the abortion amendment, but there is also now an amendment working its way through to disestablish that nonpartisan redistricting commission and go back to the old way of doing it. So as a voter, you've seen these on your ballot. Voters tend not to be particularly well informed about constitutional amendments. They hear about the candidates, especially in an election year when there's a big office up, like governor or president. And sometimes they get into those polls and they suddenly see this, shall the Constitution of Virginia be amended so as to, and this summary. And they tend to vote yes or not vote if they're not informed. Most people will not vote no just because they're not informed. So once something gets to the people like this, it's likely to pass. I won't say it will, but it's likely to pass. So here's the amendment process for the Virginia Constitution, and this is in Article 12 of our state constitution. And I will be showing you toward the end of this presentation some resources where you can find the Virginia Constitution, the Virginia Code, and quite a few other resources that are free to the public. So here's the steps. First of all, a proposed amendment has to pass both houses of the General Assembly, namely the House of Delegates and the Senate, by a majority vote in a session of the legislature, and the amendment is then recorded and placed on what I'd call a hold. Then there must be an intervening election for the House of Delegates, which incidentally are held every 2 years. The entire House of Delegates is up for re-election, and we've just had such an election where all 100 delegates were up for re-election or election. Then the amendment, using exactly the same language, must pass both houses of the General Assembly, again, by a majority vote. There's some wisdom in this, in that, in the throes of excitement about something, a legislature might pass an amendment and send it directly to the people, but this has a bit of a pause. Let's have an intervening election and see if the composition of the legislature changes at all, and see if the new legislature will still agree with the same amendment with the same language. And only then, the amendment must then be voted on by the people in an election at least 90 days after that second passage by the General Assembly. And it's a yes-no vote. And as I'll show you, the more lengthy language that has to pass both houses, it doesn't all go to the voters. I've given you a handout that shows you the very lengthy language that's in the current amendment, abortion amendment. That won't go all to the voters. There will be a summary. And I'll try to tell you what it might say that summarizes for the voters. The governor does not have veto power over a constitutional amendment. The governor has veto power over ordinary legislation, but not over a constitutional amendment. This is going to the people. So in a moment, maybe I should just go ahead and say to you, but on the amendment that I'm about to talk about, the steps that have already happened are step 1 and step 2. It has passed both houses, and there has just been this intervening election. And it will be up again to be looked at and voted on by the General Assembly in January of 2026. And because of the results of the recent election, it's very likely that that legislature will pass it again, and that it will indeed go to the people on a ballot, probably November 2026, possibly even earlier if there is some general election that gets scheduled earlier. But before we go through the current amendment, here's the current abortion law in Virginia. And I've given you the code section, which you can find using the resources I'm giving you. If you ever want to look at this yourself. To summarize, before I go through the specifics, Virginia law already allows most abortions. Abortions are very easy to get in Virginia. And Virginia is already becoming a destination state for out-of-state residents who live in states where the abortion laws are stricter. So first of all, abortion is lawful during the first trimester of pregnancy if it's performed by a physician or an advanced practice registered nurse. And an example of that is a nurse practitioner. Secondly, abortion is lawful during the second trimester of pregnancy if performed by a physician and in a hospital. So there's a little bit of a restriction there. Then abortion is lawful during the third trimester of pregnancy if performed by a physician and in a hospital, and the physician and 2 other consulting physicians certify in writing that the continuation of the pregnancy is likely to result in the death of the woman or substantially and irremediably impair the mental or physical health of the woman. So that mental health language leaves quite a big door for a physician to certify that the abortion is necessary. One other aspect of current abortion law in Virginia is what it says about minors. And here I'm referring you to another Virginia Code section. And the general provision, backing up just one second, and you can stay on this slide, but just going back to my point about, I'll just go ahead with the minors and we'll come back to maybe questions. In general, the consent of an authorized person, such as a parent or guardian, there's some other people who are listed as authorized persons, is required for a minor to have an abortion. So in general, we do require parental consent. However, a minor can obtain authorization by a court procedure without obtaining this consent. And needs to come to court and present to a judge what the minor wants. And the judge need only find that the minor is mature enough and well enough informed about abortion and its consequences, or abortion is in the minor's best interests. Best interests is a very wide open door legally. It's used in the juvenile law quite a bit for domestic relations law and juvenile law. Okay, so that's the state of abortion law already. Not hard to get an abortion in Virginia, and quite possible for a minor to get an abortion in Virginia without parental consent. At one time, we had stronger parental consent rules, but the legislature in the last few terms had rolled some of that back, changed that. So now the amendment, which I'm calling the abortion amendment, its proponents call it the reproductive freedom amendment. And as Victor has pointed out, this phrase, reproductive freedom, and other phrases, that go along with it has really become very endemic in our culture and is taught, learned, recited, and now it's being included in this abortion amendment. So I'm going to read this part of it. And this is the part that I think might end up on a ballot. It's the first part that's on that handout that I gave you. And there are more copies of the handout if needed. That every individual has the fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including the ability to make and carry out decisions related to one's own prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, abortion care, miscarriage management, and fertility care. An individual's right to reproductive freedom shall not be directly or indirectly denied, burdened, or infringed upon unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. Now, if I'd like to look at the phrases or words that I have put in italics. First of all, it says every individual. It doesn't say every woman. So it certainly could include minors, not adult women, and does. I mean, it does. And it could include someone who has changed one's gender or says one has changed one's gender, I suppose. Fundamental right is very, very strong legal language. Not many rights are considered fundamental. And this idea of the compelling state interest goes along with the concept of fundamental right. A fundamental right, by definition, will be more difficult to overcome by any sort of legislation or any other action of a government. And to abridge, I guess I'll use infringe upon, since that's the language here, a fundamental right requires a compelling state interest. This language will not go on the ballot, and so people will not understand what compelling state interest is being used to mean in this context. Near the end, it says, for the purposes of this section, a state interest is compelling only if it is for the limited purpose of maintaining or improving the health of an individual seeking care consistent with accepted clinical standards of care and evidence-based medicine, and does not infringe on that individual's autonomous decision-making. It's a very circular use of definitions. It's referring back to the individual who wants an abortion. So the only compelling state interest is one that is for the limited purpose of maintaining the health of that individual. Health as defined elsewhere in the amendment. So this goes contrary to constitutional doctrine that's been developed concerning fundamental rights and compelling state interests. I can't believe it a bit as to how it might be legally challenged. The opinion of a young lawyer whom I respect who's been working on this is that it could, possibly can be challenged under the federal Constitution, but probably under the more recent Supreme Court decisions, even the Dobbs decision, which reversed Roe versus Wade, it's not going to be easy to challenge it. So somehow in educating people about this amendment, they need to understand that it's going to be very, 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 very hard to show a compelling state interest. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but let's go to where the abortion amendment stands. I'll just rehearse what I think I already told you. It has passed in the 2025 General Assembly. It now sits on hold, and there has been this election. I actually prepared this a little bit before the November 4th election. And it's on hold until the January 2026 session of the General Assembly. If it passes, then it will be placed on the November 2026 ballot, or possibly an earlier ballot to be voted on by the citizens in a state election. The effect of this amendment, if passed, as I've said, very, very few state restrictions on abortion could pass the compelling state interest test, which is a hard test anyway, even the way it's been developed over the years. But under this definition, it's a very hard test to pass. And as I've said, that this little part of the amendment will most likely not be on the ballot. So even the limited parental consent for a minor's abortion that's required under the current law would most likely be found unconstitutional as infringing on a fundamental right of the individual seeking the abortion. You know, as Victor has pointed out, the emphasis in the culture has become that individual's right to determine what happens with that person's body, just totally setting aside the personhood of the infant that's inside that person's body, that other body that's in there. Abortions could be performed in the third trimester more liberally than they are now, because it would be based on the judgment of only one physician, and that is in the lengthy text of the amendment that I gave you, the third paragraph. Notwithstanding the above, the Commonwealth may regulate the provision of abortion care in the third trimester, provided that in no circumstance shall the Commonwealth prohibit an abortion, one, that in the professional judgment of a physician is medically indicated to protect the life or physical or mental health of the pregnant individual, or two, when in the professional judgment of a physician the fetus is not viable. So it will be easier to get abortions in the third trimester. This means abortions up to the time of birth. As I've said, that word individual could help legitimize things like transgender surgeries as part of so-called reproductive freedom. It's so broad. The effect of the amendment would be to support exploitation of young girls that are being exploited by prostitution rings and then brought in for abortions, supposedly, with some authorized person giving consent. And you can probably imagine other matters. I'll just stick with those for right now. Those are the ones that I've thought about and that organizations such as the Family Foundation are publicizing on their website. So that's my summary of the existing law, the amendment, and the effect of the amendment. I'll just take a moment to give you some resources, and I guess to give my comments on Christians, the role of Christians at this juncture in our history. These are some really good resources on Virginia law and history and politics. The first one, law.lis.virginia.gov, is a legislative information service where you can find the documents I've referred to and other legal resources and find your way around in them. There's encyclopediavirginia.org, which is a source of Virginia history and biography. The familyfoundation.org, numerous resources on political action in Virginia, collected by a Christian organization, has a very good legislative report on what happened in the 2025 legislature. And vpap.org, Virginia Public Action Project.org, which is a nonpartisan organization that collects data about elections and candidates, and has links to more detailed information. So you can go find the election results for 2025, statewide and local, and zero in on whatever you're interested in. As to our role as Christians, of course, 1 Timothy 4 tells us to pray for those in authority. And we must pray for those in authority with whom we don't agree and whom we wish were not in authority. I've said vote. Nowhere does the Bible say vote, but it says submit to those in authority, submit to your governing authorities. And submission doesn't mean, abject passivity. It implies participation. So you submit by voting. There's a procedure for being part of our government, and it's voting, the most fundamental one. And then influence, because we are to be the light of the world. We are the light of the world. First, Jesus is the light of the world, and then we are. So many of our, fathers of faith in American history have understood this. But here's a quote from Charles Finney, who was, an anti-slavery advocate and, of course, a preacher who probably brought millions of souls to salvation. The time has come that Christians must vote for honest men and take consistent ground in politics, or the Lord will curse them. God cannot sustain this free and blessed country, which we love and pray for, unless the church will take right ground. Politics are a part of religion in such a country as this, and Christians must do their duty to the country as a part of their duty to God. I said I would mention two other amendments. One is the amendment to repeal the nonpartisan redistricting commission. That's just been sneaked through the first step in a special session.
I hope that's thrown out of court.
And the other is to repeal the one man, one woman marriage definition in our state constitution now. That definition has been rendered ineffective right now anyway, because the Supreme Court some time ago decided the Obergefell case, saying that gay marriage was a right under the 14th Amendment. Why people would want to take time to repeal this, I think they're concerned that Obergefell could get overruled by the U.S. Supreme Court at some point, and so they want to solidify this their ideas into the state constitution. Why would people want even an abortion amendment with abortion already being so liberal? I think for possibly the same reason, in case federal law should change or even more, or in case something should change in the climate, they want to make sure that abortion is enshrined as a fundamental right. So I'll pray also. Lord, as has been prayed before, we ask for your wisdom and your guidance and your grace on your church in this era. we realize it's no accident that we were born at this time, and we ask that you use us in a way that pleases you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.